The Pieces Lie Where They Fell by Evil Humor. Edited and co-authored by Anon E. Mouse Jr. Read for you by My Name is R. Chapter 19. Vix-Lei, Rex, and Xvital. Part 1. Vix-Lei. "Whoa there," Vix-Lei said as Windbreaker started to move. "Take it easy, Wind. You've been out for a bit." "Excuse me?" the Griffin asked, rubbing his head and his blue eye. "What are you talking about, Vix-Lei?" "You were out like a light after you blew up the whole place, buddy." Vix-Lei walked over and patted him on the back, checking to see if he was okay, like Rex taught her and the rest of them. "Lucky that Paige was there to pull your butt out of there." "What?" Wind blinked, with his eyes starting to push himself upright from the mattress he was on. "Yes, the bolt you fired and the location on the capacitor you struck caused a chain reaction that destroyed the power station in a spectacular, fiery fashion," Rex said, walking in with the rest of the gang behind him and going straight to the Griffin. He leaned his head in to check the Griffin's wings, holding a bottle of his healing salve, and began placing some on the Griffin's back. It was an incredible diversion. The guards abandoned their attention on us to save as many people as they could, although I must admit I do not feel comfortable with the cost of our freedom. There was a murmur of agreement from Knight, Paige, and Xvital, with Wind scoffing and rolling his eyes. He pushed himself fully upright, wincing a bit, before looking at Rex. "Trust me, killing people is the last thing I want to do." Then he groaned, rubbing his eyes before letting a talon fall to his necklace. "Huh," he said, as he felt his element. "So I guess that talk with Applejack did happen." "Who?" Knight asked, tilting his head. "She's the Stallion of Dedication, and she told me that my Wait, the Stallion of Dedication is actually a mare?" Paige asked, wide-eyed. "She is," Windbreaker confirmed, "and—" "Oh, drat!" He snapped his talons. "What?" Xvital asked. "She said ponies mixed her and her brother up," Windbreaker said. "In all the excitement, I forgot to ask what his name was. Now it's going to drive me crazy, wondering about that." "Hey, don't worry about it," Vix-Lei told him. "Maybe one of the other elements knows. Knight, Rex, or Xvital, whichever one comes next, can you guys ask their predecessor about it? Your turn?" She shrugged at their faces. "Hey, it couldn't hurt to ask, right?" "Right," Xvital trailed off, before turning to face Windbreaker, looking at his crossbow gem necklace element. "You were saying what your element was?" "Right. Oh, yeah." Rex nodded his head. "We're honesty. She told me that we keep you guys honest by being honest." And Wind sighed and gripped his arm tightly while looking at the ground. "That means I need to admit I do have a drinking problem." "Finally," Knight grumbled under his breath, no doubt rolling his eyes. Vix-Lei was about to lecture him when Wind snapped back. "Yeah, it's hard to break when you were forced to start drinking when you're 9, Wind growled at Knight, who held his glare. "If you expect me to apologize for insulting you on something I had no idea on," Knight began, before Xvital stepped in between them, holding her hands out. "Okay, cool it, you two," she said, looking at Knight. "Wind, is this really the standard procedure of how your hatcheries work?" "Well, kinda." Wind scratched the back of his head. "I mean, the upper Canterlot hatcheries are better than the lower Canterlot hatcheries. I mean, they never beat us or anything. No doubt, because this upper Canterlot Such things would be noticed and reported. Rex snorted in anger. That would be bad for business. And didn't you tell me you had to dye your feathers and coat into more pleasing pony colors? Xvital asked. Well, yes, but they never starved us or anything, Windbreaker said in a nervous tone. They gave us big meal for breakfast and dinner, guys. No doubt, so you would have enough energy to do things for them. Rex snapped again, with wind folding in response. Paige simply walked over to him and stared him in the face. Why do you keep on defending them, Windbreaker? She asked, placing a hoof on his shoulder. The hatchery system is designed to break the griffin in you, so why are you so protective of them? I don't know. Maybe it's because they were the ones that raised me? Wind sighed, nuzzling against her, with tears going down his face. I don't even know what my griffin name would have been if I'd been born a free griffin. While this is no doubt very important to you, Light said loudly, we should keep on moving now that you are awake. Vix-Lei shook her head at Knight's delivery. He was right on the mark, but he really needed to work on his pitch. Still, some tar needed to make sure they didn't kill each other, and that fell to her. Well, Nighty, she said, wincing internally as she slipped into her nickname habit. Knight wasn't ready to be called Nighty yet. We need to make sure that Windbreaker here can walk around and stuff first. Where are we, by the way? Wind asked, leaning on Paige to push himself upright. We're near the east side, and a lot lower, Xvital said, handing over Wind's bag and crossbow. We've got a lot of cover now that you took out the lights and the city is still in a bit of panic. It will be a long time until they fix the generators, clear up the mess, and get everything fixed up. Wind made a little squeaking noise at hearing that, eyes bulging a bit. Yeah, Vix-Lei said, running a hand through her hair. We've got quite the bounty put on our heads because of that stunt. Just wonderful, Windbreaker muttered, as he reached for the quiver full of bolts, put it around his back, and then reached for his pack. It seems like none of my bottles broke. A true shame, Knight said, causing everyone to look at him. He then shot a look at every tar and said he was an alcoholic. Wouldn't it be good for Windbreaker if he did not have access to his bottles? There are better ways of saying that, Knight, Paige said, looking at Knight sternly and causing the bat pony to fold. Besides, I bet we could get a lot of money out of these now, since I'm not going to be needing them anymore, Windbreaker added. Perhaps, but let us sell them once we are out of Canterlot, Rex said as he walked over to the door. For now, let us move on. I am familiar with this location. We should be able to reach a safer place to rest before we move onwards to Xvital's doctor in the east-south quarter. With that, every tar began to head out, with Vix-Lei last to leave the room. Part 2. Rex. It was pitch black when his makeshift pack left the storage room, and Rex had to rely on his nose to sniff out any approaching individuals, due to his eyes not yet adapting to the darkness. He knew these streets a bit better than he had admitted to them. He'd spent some time wandering around to find a place to work after he left the Under, before settling in the lower parts of the middle east of Canterlot. It was not his preferred location to settle himself in for his livelihood, as equestrians had the notion that the higher one was, the more one was privileged. Casting his eyes to the left, he could see the lip of the middle wall, telling him that they were closing on the halfway mark of the middle district, which meant they were making excellent time. Looking down, he still saw that aisles were that of the north, decorated with only the holy symbol of the Magi of stars. It would be some time before they mixed with that of Celestia's symbol, the sun. Once they encountered that, they would be marginally safer. "Say, Rex," Vix-Lei called out to him, causing him to flick an ear. "You came from the Under, right?" "That is correct," he answered the Minotaur, continuously surprised by the depth she possessed, and ashamed of his earlier dismissal of her. "Why do you ask?" "Well, if you got up here from there, can't we use the same pathways to get out?" Her question caused him to pause and think about it, with the rest of them pulling around them. "If I were still part of my pack, I would say we could, but not now." Rex shook his head. "They would bar us entrance, and no doubt kick up such a fuss that the guards would notice, and that would defeat the purpose of us moving as silently as possible." "Can't you just slap one on?" Vix-Lei asked, with actual confusion on her face, so he did not blame her ignorance. "No, I cannot. They would be aware of it being a fake collar, as it is a very intricately designed item for each pack, and I could not in good conscience wear one belonging to another pack. It would be the same if you were to wear a symbol of Ashur instead of one of your own culture's deities, Vix-Lei." She gasped and placed a paw on her skirt, and swore in the native language of Greco. Then she shook her head and said, "Okay, I got it." "Okay, with that idea useless, shall we move on, as I don't want to—" Knight began, only to stop as he tilted his head towards the summit, with everyone else turning their head upwards, as they felt a great build-up of magic. "My dear citizens, I, Blazing Sun, the holy corona of Her Grace Celestia—" Hold up, I just realized that's... Hold up, just give me a moment. "I, Blazing Sun, the holy corona of Her Grace Celestia, have been given permission of full moon sweet surprise by Her Grace Luna to turn this unplanned night into day," a voice boomed out from everywhere, before a massive fireball flew into the sky, and a miniature sun was created. "Know that we, the captains of Equestria, will not abandon you, our citizens, and those responsible, the traitorous Six, shall be found and held accountable for their heinous crimes." Rex shared a look with everyone, no doubt feeling terrified at this declaration, save for Xvital, who seemed delighted for some reason. "This is great," she said to everyone. "Look, it's still the middle of the night, and he has to be at the top of the mountain to keep that mini sun up there, so he can't be down here." "She's right," Rex snapped his fingers. "We need to pick up the pace if we are to get into the east without too much attention." "This is getting really dangerous," Paige muttered to herself, with Knight nuzzling her and standing by her side. No doubt it would be Windbreaker and Vix-Lei as the tiebreakers if Paige Turner was against this, Nightblade would follow her, regardless of whether or not it was the right decision. "But I don't see how else we can get out of Canterlot safely." "Are you sure, Paige?" Knight asked, tilting his head, looking at her with concern. Rex felt his ears flicker at this. Knight seemed to be unconcerned about the rest of them, something that in a proper pack would be discouraged. Still, he found himself as the beta to Xvital's alpha status in their group, and thus it should be her that should say something. "Well, if Xvital and Rex say we should go now, I believe we should do what they tell us," Paige said, nuzzling him. "Well then," Knight said, turning to them, "let's move on." Part 3. Xvital. Vittel let out a snort at Knight's turnaround. She found herself trusting him less and less with each passing moment. How could she use him if he kept acting like a love-blinded idiot? Whatever, she said, tilting her head at Rex to go on. He had really proven himself to be a good number 2. He was someone that she could trust to do what was needed, and to lead the rest of them if she wasn't there. Go on, Rex, she said, rubbing her arms before looking at Windbreaker. Wait, Wind, your element. He nodded. Oh, he blinked, before widening his eyes, and removing his element and placing it in her pack. His pack, placing it in his pack. He then nodded at them to move on, with Vittel re-evaluating her opinion on Windbreaker. He could do some damage with that crossbow if he spent some time training, and when she got him sober, he would no doubt be an even better shot. He'd also proven that he was somewhat reasonable by admitting he had an addiction and making promises to work on it. He would just need to actually do it, but it was still a major step up from before with him denying his problem. If only she could get that stupid noble to shape up. Are you okay? Paige asked her, making Vittel realize she was grinding her teeth. Yeah, just thinking about stuff, she said, brushing off Paige. The unicorn was a lot more handy in a fight than she first thought a librarian could be. She could really fire up shields and blast away ponies. She smirked to herself. These girls, she found, really knew how to handle themselves, and that was always good in her books. Looking at Vix-Lei and her warhammer, most people would have to think twice. You know, for the most part, we did pretty good back there. She let her gaze linger on Knight, who saw it and snorted. What is that supposed to mean, Vittel? He glared at her, fixing his slitted eyes on her. Out of every pony here, save Vix-Lei, I am the only one with actual training in how to fight. Yeah, with a sword, she rolled her eyes, which is good and all, but unless you are willing to kill, you're going to be pulling your punches and hesitating, which could get the rest of us in real trouble. So unless you're ready to kill, I did kill some pony tonight, Rex snapped at her, causing the Owie to do a double take. When they were chasing Paige and I brought the waster. The what? Windbreaker asked, getting an exasperated look from Knight. The wooden sword they were using against us, he said in a very annoyed tone, rolling his eyes. As I was saying, when they were chasing us, I brought the edge of the weapon against a guard's neck, hard enough to hear the bone break. He stopped all of a sudden, licking his lips, and began to pant. I killed some pony. Well, she felt completely terrible now. Still, they didn't need Knight to freak out. They needed to move on. Are you okay, Knight? Paige asked him, placing a hoof on his back. I don't think it's the fact I killed some pony that's bothering me, but the fact I'm okay with it that's getting to me. He paused and looked at his talent emblem as if he were seeing it for the first time. Vittel didn't quite understand the pony's butt destiny thing, but this was clearly something that only ponies could deal with. Still, he could deal with his freak-out later, once they were all safe and sound. Look, I was wrong, but we need to get indoors before we get a lot of guards after our tails. This got her dirty looks from both Knight and Paige, but she wasn't that fazed by it, as she'd seen worse when she was younger. I think I see an inn sign up ahead, so once Knight pays the innkeeper off heavily to stay quiet, we can plan our next steps in relative peace. Unless you've got a problem with that, Knight? Knight just glared at her, baring his fangs for a moment, before shaking his head and saying no. Good. She reached over and patted him on the head, before tilting her head at the rest of the crew to move on. I, for one, am looking to a nice bed for once. Been stuck in jail last night, and man, do those benches have a lot to be desired, eh? That got her a few chuckles from Windbreaker and Vix-Lei, with Rex nodding his head and Paige smiling. Only Knight was still frowning, but 4 out of 5 wasn't bad, and he seemed to be the stick-in-the-mud type of guy. She might ask Paige what his deal was later, but first things first, they needed to see if the inn was actually an inn. Alrighty. I hadn't noticed the killing bit when we saw the fight 2 chapters ago. That is a serious thing. Yes. Someone's first kill. It's usually a good sign if it messes with them in some way. If it doesn't, that's a sign of other issues. But sometimes it needs to be done. Most unfortunate part is in this case, it wasn't a bad person he killed. It was just a guard doing their job. It's always unfortunate when people are tricked into fighting one another who really wouldn't be fighting each other if they knew what was going on. Yeah. It's unfortunate. It's a little sad, but it happens sometimes. Well, I think that's all for today's chapter. I hope you enjoyed listening to this chapter of The Pieces Lie Where They Fell. I'll see you again later. Thanks for listening. Goodbye, everyone. Have a pleasant... I was going to say evening, but it's just evening for me recording this. Have a pleasant whenever you're listening.